In this video, we're going to be dividing polynomials. We're going to do so with long division and synthetic division. So with that said, our warm-ups today are actually long division, reminding you back when you were in middle school probably or elementary school that you had to do this long division. So let's start out. 101,952 divided by 59. 59 goes on the outside. You're going to divide into 101,952. And the way we do that, we say 59 will go into, won't go into 1, won't go into 10, but it will go into 101. And we ask ourselves how many times. Let's see, I think it'll go once. 1 times 59 is 59. You multiply and you subtract your answers. Gives you, let's see, I think that'd be a 42. Bring down the 9. Now, 59 into 429. Now, I had elementary teachers that would always tell me this. Look at the numbers out front. If you don't know how many times it'll go, maybe look at the 5 and look at the 42. Drop one of the numbers and say, well, how many times will that go? And that'll give you something to try. So 5 into 42 would go about 8 times. You could try that. I don't think it'll go quite that because this is actually nearly 60. So I'm going to try 7. I think it's going to go 7 times. 7 times 59 would be 413. Once you multiply, you subtract. It gives you 16. We now bring down a 5. 59 into 165 will go twice. 2 times 59 is 118. Subtract it, gives you 47. Bring down the 2. And then 59 into 472 will go 8 times. 8 times 59 gives you 472. Remainder 0. And a reminder also that last number we called the remainder. Anytime that remainder is 0, this is important. That means that 59, we can say this, is a factor. So let's go ahead and address that now. If the remainder is equal to 0, that means that 59 was a factor of 101,952 because it divided evenly with no remainder left over. Okay? So since it did divide evenly, we could now rewrite 101,952 as 59 times 1728. Okay, the next one, number 2, let's do it again. 13 divided into 5,467. Let's see if it's a factor. 13 won't go into 5, but it will go into 54 4 times. 4 times 13 is 52. Subtract. 54 minus 52 is 2. Bring down the 6. 13 will go into 26 twice. 2 times 13 is 26. Subtract gives you 0. Bring down the 7. 13 will go into 7. It won't. 0 times 13 is 0. Subtract gives 7. So that means that 13 was not a factor because you have a remainder of 7. Now back when you first started, you put a big R and you put a 7 there. We don't do that anymore. We now say take your remainder and write it over what you divided by. And again, you might be saying, why are we doing this? These exact same principles you're going to use in long division and synthetic division of polynomials. What are you going to do? You're going to divide, you're going to multiply, you're going to subtract, you're going to bring down, those exact same steps. So it says the same concepts can be applied to dividing polynomials. So let's actually divide one of these. We've got x minus 2 divided into x to the third plus 4x squared minus 16x plus 8. Step number 1. The same way I told you to just focus on the first number if you couldn't figure out how many times it'll go into it, same thing here. Only think about the x and the x to the third. We're going to divide this binomial into, first off, this binomial, the exact same way we did above. So let's just focus on x and x to the third, though. Now, how do I divide that? How do you actually divide maybe 3 into 15? You know what? You probably don't divide. You ask yourself 3 times what is 15? And you know that it's 5 because I know that 3 times 5 would give me 15. You do the same thing here. You ask yourself x times what would give me x to the third. Now, that would be x to the second. So that's how many times it's going to go. Now that I know how many times it's going to go, just like you did in these examples, once you figure out what you think it is, you now multiply. And you're going to take this x squared and actually multiply it by both of these terms. X squared times x would be x to the third. X squared times negative 2 gives you negative 2x squared. What do we do next? We subtract. And make sure, here's the most important part, make sure you subtract the whole thing. You've got to do x to the third minus x to the third, which should always cancel. And you've also got to do positive 4x squared minus negative 2x squared. If you would like to change that to a plus, that's fine. That'd be 4 plus 2, which will give you 6x squared. Because a minus minus, that's the reason we can change it to a plus. Let me go back and change it back to a minus, though, just to make sure that you remember. What do we do now? We bring down the next term, negative 16x, and we repeat the process. We take our x and we take our 6x squared and we say, well, how many times will that go into 6x squared? How do we divide? Well, we multiply. X times what gives me 6x squared? That would be a positive 6x. And you can check it here. Take that, multiply it by both. 6x times x gives you 6x squared, which it should. 6x times negative 2 gives you a negative 12x. You again subtract. 6x squared minus 6x squared should always cancel. Negative 16 minus negative 12 is the same thing as negative 16 plus 12. Negative 4x, last step, bring down the 8. You now ask yourself, x will go into negative 4x how many times? X times negative 4 is negative 4x. You now take the negative 4, multiply it by both. Repeat the same process. Negative 4 times x is negative 4x. A negative 4 times a negative 2 is a positive 8. Again, you subtract. Negative 4 minus negative 4 should cancel. 8 minus 8 also cancels and leaves you with nothing. What does that mean? That means that this, and this is what's going to be so important, since there is no remainder, this must be a factor of this, which means this times this should give you this. Next problem. We're going to divide by x plus 4. Again, this is called long division. The reason it's called long division, I guess, is because it takes so long. 3x to the third plus 2x to the second minus 37x plus 12. Focus on your first term. X into 3x to the third goes 3x squared times. Because 3x squared times x gives you 3x to the third. Multiply it back out, distribute it, 3x squared times x, and 3x squared times 4. It would be a positive 12x squared. Now, one thing that I do need to address now, if you're ever missing a term, now, what do I mean by that? Here you have an x to the third, you have an x to the second, you have an x to the first, and you have an x to the 0. If you ever are missing a term, you have to fill in, like if you're missing an x squared, you would have to fill in with plus 0x squared, but we'll address that later. We now subtract. This should always cancel. Leaves you with 2 minus 12, which is negative 10x to the second. Bring down your next term. X into negative 10x squared goes negative 10x times. Check it by multiplying. Negative 10x times x is negative 10x squared. That does check out. Negative 10x times 4 gives you negative 40x. You now subtract. Negative 10 minus negative 10. Negative 37 minus negative 40 would be negative 37 plus 40, which is 3x. Bring down the plus 12. X into 3x goes 3 times. Multiply it to check it, and you get 3x plus 12. When you subtract those, it gives you 0. Again, when you have a 0 remainder, I can't stress this enough, this was a factor of this. When you divided this into 3x to the third stuff, you got this as an answer, which means that this times this must equal this. Number 5, we're dividing by 2x plus 7 into 2x to the third plus 5x to the second minus 19x minus 42. 2x times x gives you, or x squared gives you 2x to the third. Distribute it. X squared times 2x gives 2x to the third. It checks out. X squared times 7 is a 7x squared. We now subtract. Cancels. 5 minus 7 is negative 2x to the second. Bring down negative 19x. 2x times what gives you negative 2x squared? That would be a negative 1x. Distributed negative x times 2x is a negative 2x to the second. A negative x times 7 is a negative 7x. We subtract. Cancels. Negative 19 minus negative 7 would be negative 19 plus 7, which is negative 12x. Bring down negative 42. 2x goes into negative 12x negative 6 times because negative 6 times 2x is negative 12x. Distribute it to both, though, and you also get negative 42. When you subtract, you get 0. No remainder, which again means this is a factor, which means this times this should equal what you're dividing into there. Number 6, we're dividing by x squared plus 8. Now here, this goes into what I said. If you're ever missing a term, x squared plus 8, well, where's the x? You do have to put that. X squared plus 0x plus 8 whenever you're dividing. In here or here, with either one of them, if you're ever missing a term, if you were to write it in descending order, starting with the highest power and count down, x to the second, x to the first, x to the 0. If you're ever missing a term, you have to put in 0 whatevers, just to make sure everything lines up just right. So you're dividing into x to the fourth plus 3x to the third. If you don't understand why you have to, try to do it sometime without adding in that missing term, and it will not line up. So again, we're only worried about our first term, so you do it the same way. X squared times x squared would give you the x to the fourth. You have to distribute the x squared times all three. X squared times x squared. X squared times 0x would be 0x to the third, and you see how that lined up with the other x to the third? And x squared times 8 would be a positive 8x squared. We now subtract. This cancels. 3 minus 0 gives you 3x to the third. 4 minus 8 gives you a negative 4x to the second. You now bring down the next term, positive 24x. X squared times a positive 3x gives you 3x to the third. Distribute it back out to all three. That'd be 3x to the third plus 0x to the second. And again, it lined up perfect. Plus 24x. We now subtract. Those cancels. Negative 4 minus 0 gives you negative 4x to the second. Even though these cancels, you still have to put plus 0x's just to get it to line up. And finally, bring down your minus 32. X squared into negative 4x squared goes negative 4 times. Check it by multiplying. Gives you negative 4x to the second plus 0x's and a negative 32. And notice that those are identical, so when you go to subtract it, you will again get 0, which means this times this must be a factor of that. Number 7, non-zero remainders. What do we do when we don't have when we do have a remainder? Here we're dividing by x plus 1. We have 3x to the third plus 7x to the second plus 2x plus 3. So this must not be a factor. X will go into that, 3x squared times. Distribute times both, 3x squared times x, 3x squared times 1. Subtract. This should always cancel. 7 minus 3 gives you 4x squared. Bring down the plus 2x. Do it again. X times what gives you 4x squared will be a positive 4x. Multiply it times both gives you a 4x squared and a positive 4x. Subtract. This should always cancel. 2 minus 4 is negative 2x. Bring down the positive 3. X times what gives you negative 2x will be a negative 2. Negative 2 times x is negative 2x. Negative 2 times 1 is a negative 2. When you subtract, this does cancel, but you're left with a 5. So again, in the good old days, we put a big R and we put remainder 5. Here's what I want you to do now. You're going to take the remainder and the same thing we did up top, you're going to write it over what you divided by. However, since it's a positive, we will put plus in front of it, plus 5 over x plus 1, and that's it. So in this case, you did have a remainder, which meant that this is not a factor of that. Okay, number 8. We're dividing by 3x minus 2. You have all your terms there, so we're fine. We have 6x to the third, negative 13, x to the second, so third power, second power, first power, and no power. 3 times 2 gives you 6. X times x squared gives you x to the third. Distribute to both. That'd be 6x to the third minus 4x squared. When you subtract, this cancels and leaves you with negative 13 minus negative 4, which would be negative 13 plus 4, which is a negative 9x to the second. Bring down 12x. 3x times negative 3x gives you negative 9x squared. Distribute. Times both. Negative 3x times 3x is a negative 9x to the second. Negative 3x times negative 2 is a positive 6x. Subtract. Cancels. 12 minus 6 gives you 6. Bring down the next term, which is plus 6. 3x times a positive 2 gives you a 6x. And 2 times negative 2 would be a negative 4. Subtract, and you will get a remainder. Cancels. 6 minus negative 4 would be 6 plus 4, which is 10. Since it is a positive 10, you're going to do plus 10 over whatever you divided by, which in this case is 3x minus 2. So therefore, this is not a factor of this because there was a remainder. Number 9. This one looks pretty ugly. X squared minus x minus 5 divided into x to the fourth minus 5x to the third plus x to the second plus 20x minus 10. Focus on x squared. X squared times x squared gives you x to the fourth. Distribute x squared. That'd be x to the fourth minus x to the third minus 5x to the second. Subtract them. They should always cancel. Negative 5 minus negative 1 will be negative 5 plus 1, which is negative 4x to the third. 1 minus negative 5 will be 1 plus 5, which is a positive 6x to the second. Bring down 20x. Same thing. X squared into negative 4x third will go negative 4x times. Distribute. Negative 4x times all three is negative 4x to the third. Positive 4x to the second. And a positive 20x. When you subtract, make sure you distribute it. That's gone. 6 minus 4 gives you 2x to the second. 20 minus 20 gives you plus 0x's. Let's go ahead and leave it there so that everything lines up. Bring down your negative 10. X squared into 2x squared goes twice. Distribute it, gives you 2x squared, a negative 2x, and a negative 10. So it was nice that we left that middle term or it would not have lined up. Subtract, this is gone. 0 minus negative 2 is 0 plus 2, which is 2. Negative 10 minus negative 10 actually cancels as well. So plus 0, or you can just leave, here's your remainder. So you're going to do plus, since it's positive, your remainder over whatever you divided by, which is x squared minus x minus 5. You could look and see if that would reduce. Sometimes it will not in this case. So there's your answer. Okay, next up, number 10. What happens when you have missing powers? We've already addressed this. Again, notice you have x to the fourth, x to the second, x to the first, and x to the 0. There's no x to the thirds. All you have to do is just make sure to include it. So we have x to the fourth plus no x to the thirds minus 64x to the second plus 9x minus 80. Then everything else is done exactly the same thing. I'm going to fly through this pretty quick. X to the third gives you x to the fourth minus 8x to the third. When you subtract, you have 8x to the third, bring down minus 64x to the second. Divide gives you positive 8x squared. Multiply it back gives you 8x to the third minus 64x squared. Subtract those two. This should always cancel. Now here, this canceled as well. Make sure you go ahead and put your 0x squared so you don't get confused. Bring down 9x. X will go into 0, x squared, 0 x's. I'm going to go ahead and put that there so there's no confusion. 0 times 0x squared would be 0x squared. 0 times negative 8x would be negative or positive, really doesn't matter, 0 x's. Subtract. These are gone. 9 minus 0 is still 9. Bring down negative 80. X and a 9x will go 9 times. When you multiply it out, it gives you 9x minus 72. Subtraction. Gone. Negative 80 plus 72 is a negative 8. Now this remainder is negative, so make sure when you tack it on you do a minus. So your answer here, let me write it over here instead, would be x to the third plus 8x to the second. Notice I have 0 x's. You now don't have to put that in the answer. So plus 9, and you have minus your remainder over what you divided by. And again, the reason I put a minus there is because that 8 is a negative 8. Again, missing terms, we're dividing by x plus 1. We're dividing into 12x to the third plus 4x to the second. I have no x's. Notice it skips that term, so I have to put 0 x's plus 4. And again, I'm going to go through this pretty quick. X into 12x third goes 12x squared times. Distribute gives you 12x to the third plus 12x to the second. Subtract. Cancels. 4 minus 12 is negative 8x to the second. Bring down 0x. Good thing we put it so that it lines up right here. Distribute negative 8x gives you negative 8x to the second and a negative 8x. Make sure you subtract them both. 0 minus negative 8 is a positive 8x. Bring down the 4. That should go 8 times. 8 times that would be 8x plus 8. Subtract 4, let's say cancels. 4 minus 8 is negative 4. So your answer, 12x squared minus 8x plus 8. Since your remainder is 4, I'm going to put minus the remainder over whatever you divided by x plus 1. Okay, now let's talk about the shortcut. Dividing polynomials with synthetic division. Synthetic division is a shortcut method to divide polynomials, but it only sometimes works. Now, they say this method only works when dividing by a binomial with a coefficient of 1. Here's what I'm going to say. I can actually do it. I can show you a method to where it's going to work with any linear binomial, even if the coefficient is not 1. So any linear binomial, which means if this is linear, and it's a binomial, then we can divide by using synthetic division. Here's how synthetic division works. Step 1, whatever you're dividing by. This is how I explain it. Set it equal to 0, solve it, and whatever you get, that's what you're going to be dividing by. So we're going to put a negative 4 up here next to our box. We'll talk more about that in a second. Inside the box, you're going to put your coefficients of whatever you're dividing into. 1x to the third, negative 1x to the second, negative 27x's, negative 28. You're going to put a 1, negative 27, negative 28. All of your coefficients and your constant. And here's the steps. Step number 1, bring down your first number below the box. Okay, now here's the rule. As soon as something gets below the box, you're going to multiply it by this. So you're going to do negative 4 times 1. Whatever you get, you're going to put it below your next number. Then you're going to add or subtract. Here you have a negative 1 and a negative 4. Negative 1, negative 4, when you put them together, gives you a negative 5. And some people say, well, do you add there or do you subtract? Well, negative 1 plus negative 4 is negative 5. Or if you want to think of it as negative 1 minus 4, that's negative 5. So whichever you want to think of it as. As soon as something gets below the box, you multiply by this number. Negative 4 times negative 5 is a 20. If you'll put a plus sign there, it makes more sense. It's a positive 20. Now you have negative 27 plus 20. Put those together and you get a negative 7. Once something gets below the box, you multiply it by this number. Negative 4 times negative 7 is a positive 28. Positive. And a negative 27 plus 28 is 0. Put a box around the last number, because this number is going to be your remainder. So what does that mean? We had a remainder of 0. Again, that means that that must have been a factor of that. So how can we pull our answer from this now? Okay, the last number will be your remainder. The next number will be your constant term, which means it will have no x's. The next number will be your x term. The next number will be your x squared term. If you have another one, you'll put it on x to the third. The next one will be x to the fourth. And you just start increasing your powers of x by 1. So negative 7 was your constant. Negative 5 here is your x term, so put an x with it. Positive 1 here is your x squared term, so put an x squared with it. And there's your answer. You don't have to really put the 1, x squared minus 5x minus 7, which is much faster than long division. Let's try another one. X minus 2 is what you're dividing by. Set it equal to 0. Move the 2 over. You're going to put a 2 outside the box. So you're dividing by x minus 2, so put a 2. Now, again, what I was about to get into a while ago, a lot of people says, can I just put the opposite there? Yeah, most of the time. That's positive 4, put a negative 4. That's a minus 2, put a positive 2. Now we put the coefficients on the inside. Careful to see if anything got skipped. 3, negative 22, 37, negative 10. There was no term skipped, so we're fine. Step 1, bring down the first term. As soon as something gets below the box, multiply it by this number, it gives you a positive 6. A negative 22 plus 6 is a negative 16 as soon as something gets below the box. Multiply. 37 minus 32 is a positive 5. So as soon as it gets below the box, multiply, gives you a positive 10. Last number is always your remainder. So again, we have a remainder of 0. Constant x squared. So your 3 goes with x squared. Your negative 16 goes with x, and the positive 5 is a constant. There is no remainder. So there's what you get when you divide. So this is a factor of this. Number 14. What happens when you don't have a remainder? It's fine, same thing. So plus 5, set it equal to 0, solve, gives you negative 5. The numbers, coefficients are 1, 1, negative 22, and negative 1. Always check to see if there's any missing terms. There's not here. Bring down the 1, multiply when it gets below the box. 1 minus 5 is a negative 4. When it gets below the box, multiply, gives you a positive 20. Negative 22 plus 20 is a negative 2. Multiply gives you 10, a positive 10. Negative 1 and 10 is a positive 9, and that's your remainder. Constant x squared. So 1x squared, negative 4x. Constant is negative 2. Your remainder is a positive 9. You put it over what you divided by. So in this case, we divided by x plus 5, so positive 9 over x plus 5. Same thing. Number 15, another one. We're dividing by x minus 3, so put a 3. You have a 4x to the third, negative 16x to the second, a positive 20x to the first, and a negative 16 as a constant. Bring down the first number, multiply it when it gets below the box, positive 12. Combine negative 16 and 12 is negative 4. Multiply it gives you negative 20. 20 minus 12 is positive 8. Multiply it gives you a positive 24. So your remainder is going to be a positive 8. Constant x squared. 4x squared, negative 4x, positive 8, plus your remainder over what you divided by, which was an x minus 3. Number 16, what happens when you have missing terms? It's fine. Set this equal to 0 and solve. The negative 8 goes outside the box. Your coefficients are 1, 0, negative 49, and 120. So where does 0 come from? You have x to the third, you have x to the first. You don't have x to the second. You have to put the 0 to make it line up. Bring it down. When it gets below the box, you multiply by it. 0 minus 8 is negative 8. Get below the box, multiply it. Gives you a positive 64. Negative 49 and 64 is a positive 15. Negative 8 and 15 is a negative 120. Remainder, 0. Constant x squared. So 1x squared, negative 8x, positive 15, with no remainder. And the next one, you're dividing by x minus 9, set it equal to 0, so we're going to put a 9. 1x to the fourth, negative 9x to the third, 0x to the second, 0x to the first, and a negative 1. Bring down the 1, multiply, positive 9. Combine those two. Negative 9, positive 9 is 0. Multiply gives you 0. Combine them. 0 and 0 gives you 0. Multiply them gives you 0. 0 and 0 still gives you 0. Multiply them gives you 0. Negative 1 and 0 gives you a negative 1 remainder. So what does that look like? Constant, x to the first, x to the second, x to the third. So you have x to the third power. Since the remainder is a negative, I'm going to put minus 1 over whatever you divided by, which was an x minus 9. Okay, now let's actually talk about why this lesson is so important. Factor a polynomial with division. How can division be used to factor polynomials? Suppose you are giving a polynomial function and one of its linear factors. You can completely factor the polynomial by dividing the function by its known factor. Example, use division to write this function in factored form if x minus 4 is a factor. Then determine the zeros. Okay, well, if x minus 4 is a factor, okay, let's use simpler terms. 12. Back in the elementary school, we had to do factor trees. And if I gave you one factor, how did you find the other factor? Did you not do 12 divided by 3 and it gave you 4? So if I knew that 3 was one of the factors, when I divided, I got 4, so that told me the other factor. So what we're going to do, if I know the number I'm trying to factor, which in this case, here's what I'm trying to factor. If I know one of the two factors, I'm going to divide to find the other factor. So I'm going to divide 4, since it's x minus 4, I can very easily divide that into 1x to the third, negative 5x to the second, positive 2x, positive 8. And I'm going to go through the process, bring it down, multiply. Combine the two, multiply. Negative 2, multiply. 0. And they didn't lie to me, it's a factor. The reason I know it's a factor is because I have 0 remainder. So what did I just do? I took x to the third minus 5x squared plus 2x plus 8. I knew that x minus 4 was one of the factors. When I divided it by x minus 4, I got this, which is x squared minus x minus 2, which must be the other factor. However, it does say factor it completely, so I think we can break this down again, the same way as we could have broke this down into 2 times 2 again. Let's continue factoring. This is done. X minus 4 is a linear factor. This will now break down into x times x. Adds, multiplies will be a negative 2 and a positive 1. There are the 3 linear factors of this function. Then determine the zeros of the function. Your 3 zeros are x equals 4, because negative x minus 4 is a factor, x equals 2, because x minus 2 is a factor, and x equals negative 1, because x plus 1 is a factor. You could set the factors, we just did that, set the factors equal to 0, solve, and that's going to tell you what the 3 zeros are. Now let's try another one. Given the polynomial function and one of its factors, use long division or synthetic division to find the zeros. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, I'm not a big fan of long division, so anytime I can use synthetic division, I'm going to. So we're dividing by 7, x minus 7, so we put a 7 on the outside, set it equal to 0, solve it, that's what goes on the outside. 1x to the third, don't forget your 0, there's no x squared. Negative 37x and a negative 84. Bring down the 1, multiply. Combine them. 0 plus 7 is 7. Multiply gives you 49. Negative 37 and 49 is a positive 12. Gives you an 84, which gives you no remainder. So again, what you just did, and I'm going to write it out. I like to do it in factor tree form. X to the third minus 37x minus 84. You just divided by x minus 7, and you got this. Constant x squared, which is x squared plus 7x plus 12. Let's factor that again, two sets of parentheses. X times x gives you x squared, a positive 3 and a positive 4 gives you positive 12. Here are your linear factors. If x minus 7 is a factor, we're going to go through and set all these equal to 0, and that's going to tell me my 3 zeros. So my 3 zeros are x equals 7, negative 3, and negative 4. So what do we just do? Think about it. We factored this, x to the third. It's going to look something like this. And we found out that negative 4, negative 3, and 7 were the three places where this graph would cross the x-axis. Next one, we're dividing by x plus 3. X plus 3 is one of the factors, so we're going to divide by that. We have 2, negative 3, negative 32, and negative 15. Bring down the 2, multiply. Combine those together, multiply. That's a positive 27, so combine those together, multiply, positive 15 gives you a remainder of 0. So you just divided this by x plus 3, and you got this. So now I've just broke this down, and you can do the factor tree if you'd like to, or you can just list them. I just broke that down into x plus 3 times 2x squared minus 9x minus 5. Now what do I do? This can be factored again. Let me change colors here, and let's factor that by using slip and slide. Come down here to the bottom. That's going to be x squared minus 9x minus 10. Two sets of parentheses, x and x, negative 10, positive 1. Divide by the 2 that you moved, and that's going to be, now I can write it up here. Bring that down. Two sets of parentheses. 10 divided by 2 will be x minus 5. This does not divide or reduce, so slide the 2 back up front, you get 2x plus 1. So these are the linear factors. Set each equal to 0. Solve it, and you get negative 3, positive 5, and negative 1/2 are the 3 zeros. Okay, now here. They said a while ago that you can only use the shortcut when this has a coefficient of 1. That's not true. Here's all you have to do to use the shortcuts. Same thing I've been telling you. Set this equal to 0 and solve it. Subtract 5, divide by 2, and you get negative 5/2. That's what goes on the outside. Now, it's not as clean. It doesn't look as good, but it's going to come out nice and neat. 6x to the third, 1x to the second, negative 27x's, and a positive 20. You can just put 20 there. It's understood to be positive. Bring down the 6. Negative 5/2 times 6 should always clean up pretty nice. It would be a negative 15. I actually put that in the wrong place. Negative 15. 1 minus 15 is a negative 14. Multiply that by negative 5/2. First off, negative times negative is a positive. When you cross cancel the 2 and 14, leaves you with 1 and 7, and that's going to be 35. And you can check that over to the side if you'd like. Negative 27 and 35 is a positive 8. When you multiply 8 times negative 5/2, that'd be a negative 2 and 8 cross cancel, negative 20. Remainder 0. So therefore, you just divided by 2x plus 5. We just broke this down. Now, here's one thing weird that does always happen when you use this trick. You took 6x to the third plus x squared minus 27x plus 20. Let me do my factor tree here. I divided by, technically, when I did this, I divided by x plus 5/2. Make sure we follow that, which is going to have the same zeros as this if you check it. I got this, which is 6x squared minus 14x plus 8. Now that's going to factor. First thing I notice is there's a 2 in there. Okay, so the first thing you can do is you could break this down into 2 parentheses, x squared minus 3x squared minus 7x plus 4. And notice this, that if you were to put the 2 back up here and distribute it out, and this always happens, if you were to put the 2 back here and distribute it times both of these, guess what you get? You get this back. Okay, so that always happens, so you can leave it either way. So I'm going to leave the 2 down here, and we're going to do some slip and slide here. Let's do it over here to the side. You have x squared minus 7x plus 12 factors into x minus 3, x minus 4. You moved a 3, so that's going to be now, I'm going to bring down my 2. This breaks into x minus 1, and the 3 comes back up front, 3x minus 4. So therefore, my factors are here, 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 and here. In order to find the zeros of this function, again, it doesn't matter that you multiply this back out, because look what happens. When you set this equal to 0 and solve it, you get negative 5 halves. If you were to distribute that back and turn it back into this, when you set it equal to 0 and solve it, you still get the same negative 5 halves. Here, set it equal to 0 gives you 1. Set this equal to 0 gives you 4/3. So there are your 3 zeros of this function. And the last one. We're dividing by x minus 1, so we're putting 1 on the outside. Our coefficients are 2, 1, negative 11, negative 4, and positive 12. And I'm just going to put a 12 there. A reminder that since it's x to the 4th, real coefficients, or excuse me, real zeros, I'll either have 4, 2, or none. There's a possibility I could have no real zeros here, and we'll talk more about that later on in the chapter. Bring it down, multiply. Add them together, multiply. Add them together, multiply. Add them together, multiply, add them together. So there we have a remainder of 0. So we have broken this down into x minus 1, which we divided by, times this stuff. Constant, x to the 1st, x to the 2nd, x to the 3rd. So x to the 3rd, x to the 2nd, x to the 1st, and constant. There's what we've broken it down into. Now, how in the world are we going to factor this? Well, if it has 4 terms, we factor by grouping. Bring down x minus 1. Factor this by grouping. I'm going to put it in brackets here. We're going to factor out an x squared. You're going to be left with a 2x plus 3. I'm going to factor out a negative 4. You're going to be left with 2x plus 3. Both terms have a 2x plus 3. Bring down your x minus 1. Both terms have a 2x plus 3. Factor that out, and you're left with an x squared and a minus 4. So now you have a linear factor, and a quadratic factor. So let's try to break down that quadratic one more time. 2x plus 3. This is difference of squares. Difference of squares factors into conjugates. X times itself gives you x squared. 2 times itself gives you 4. So therefore, your 4 zeros here now. Set it equal to 0, you get 1. Set it equal to 0, and that is 2x plus 3, you get negative 3 halves. Set it equal to 0 gives you negative 2. Set it equal to 0 gives you positive 2.